edited by Jim Harrison, who has 3 degrees from Macquarie, let me say. So I will pass over to Con Campbell, whom we've already had introduced to you, to launch the book. I've asked Jim to reply, and then I have 3 little announcements to make afterwards. So I'll hand over to Con.
My PhD undertaken here at Macquarie, completed in 2006. Yeah. Oh, where? Okay. Oh, yes. Okay. It was great. Involved research on the ancient Greek verbal system and its function within narrative texts, alongside close examination of New Testament Gospels, the Septuagint, and a selection of classical and post-classical Greek texts. I took a deep dive into the Oxyrhynchus papyri. As I read through the published collection from Oxyrhynchus, I was blown away by how these texts opened up and illustrated the ancient world for me in ways I could not have imagined. The minutiae of everyday life in antiquity suddenly came alive. As I read a letter from a teenager begging his father to take him to the city with him, or else, through to a contract issued to a mouse catcher, through to court documents, love letters, shopping lists, and even a previously unknown Gnostic gospel fragment. I began studying the Oxyrhynchus papyri for linguistic textual reasons, but came away with an appreciation of how material artifacts from antiquity, such as papyri, inscriptions, and ostraca, offer rich, vast, and variegated insights into the ancient world. My own experience amounts to discovering for myself what many have discovered before me, so I feel a little silly recounting it as though I stumbled across something new. But perhaps like a stubborn teenager, sometimes you have to figure things out for yourself, even if it's exactly what the adults have been telling you all along. New Documents Illustrating Early Christianity is a distinguished series respected the world over by ancient historians and biblical scholars alike. In some ways, the series is like the adult who takes the ignorant teenager by the hand and says, "Let me show you how inscriptions from the ancient world can directly affect the way you read the Bible and understand early Christianity." Rather than expecting every Bible student or scholar should develop their own vast knowledge of ancient material artifacts and join the dots to Christianity for themselves, it joins the dots for us. In this way, New Docs is a vital bridge to what is, for many, an unknown ancient world. Born through the Macquarie University Ancient History Department in 1981, I think it was 81, New Docs began under the editorial oversight of Greg Horsley, volumes 1 to 5, and Dr. Stephen Llewellyn, 6 to 10, and is now led by distinguished Professor Jim Harrison. The next installments of the series, volumes 11 to 16, will focus on the epigraphic evidence of major Eastern Mediterranean cities that were the hubs of early Christianity in the 1st century. Drawing on an international team of experts, each volume will consist of 2 parts. Part A of each volume will offer a history of the city's excavation and epigraphy, and 25 translated inscriptions and commentary. Part B of each volume will include thematic essays drawing on local epigraphic evidence related to the religious, political, social, and economic life of each city, as well as exegetical essays discussing the New Testament documents relevant to each city. This is a major new undertaking under Jim Harrison's leadership, and it promises to make a substantial and consequential contribution to the study of the New Testament, early Christianity, and Eastern Mediterranean antiquities. I find the focus on ancient cities relevant to early Christianity especially interesting. The volume being launched today focuses on the grand ancient city of Ephesus. Volume 12 will address Colossae, Hierapolis, and Laodicea. Volume 13 on Philippi. Volume 14, Rome, Ostia, Pompeii, and Puteoli. And 15 on Galatia, 16 on Thessalonica, and 17 on Corinth, Centrea, and Isthmia. I'm privileged to have the opportunity to say a few words about the volume being launched today. This is what it looks like, A and B. New Docs 11, Addressing Texts from Ephesus, edited by Jim Harrison and Brad Bittner. Volume 11A contains 25 essays, 18 of which were written by Jim, who also wrote the introduction. Without wanting to devalue the contributions of others, this volume is virtually a Jim Harrison monograph, peppered with some guest chapters by Brad Bittner, Isaac Soon, and Philip Ort. Each essay is beautifully written, richly informed, insightful, balanced, and illuminating. One of the temptations for a volume like this is to claim too much for its insights, as though each inscription might dramatically alter how we understand Paul's theology, or to claim that we've been reading the letter to the Ephesians all wrong all this time. No such grandiose claims are found here. Instead, the authors do an excellent job of considering how each inscription contributes to our reading of the New Testament. Sometimes such contributions are quite subtle, helping to fill out the cultural context as it relates to religion or politics, for example. Other times, contributions may offer an alternate way to understand a particular element within the New Testament, but such alternatives are not pushed ahead of existing options, but are simply presented for consideration alongside them. Indeed, sometimes the author argues that the new alternative provided by epigraphy is not actually the best candidate for exegetical interpretation for various reasons, including theological reasons. And perhaps most important, the essays show how New Testament authors often buck against or reconfigure existing cultural norms. This kind of balanced and nuanced approach to the subject matter demonstrates that the New Docs project is not claiming that you don't know anything if you don't know New Docs, but that New Docs can supplement, illuminate, and yes, sometimes challenge what you think you already know. I'll just spend a few minutes sharing a couple of examples if I have time. There are many examples from which to choose, but one that stands out for me is Jim's essay called Ambassador in Chains, Ephesians 6:20. What might Ephesian auditors have heard? Here, Jim explores Paul's oxymoronic juxtaposition of high status, ambassador, with low status, being in chains. Such oxymorons are not unusual for Paul, but the essay serves to highlight just how outrageous it would have sounded to his original hearers. The essay culminates with the heartwarming reflection, quote, "For Paul, his apostolic experience as an ambassador of Christ simultaneously reflects in his pastoral ministry the career extremes of the dishonor and rejection of the crucified Christ and, concomitantly, the honor and vindication of the risen Christ. Honor and dishonor, ill repute and good repute, impostors yet true, unknown yet known, dying yet alive, punished yet not killed. Literally stripped of all his resources in prison, the impoverished apostle was making others rich through the divine reconciliation he offered the world as Christ's ambassador." End quote. Now, I think such a conclusion could have been reached without New Docs, but reading the essay makes it fuller and deeper and more historically meaningful as we're able to feel how Paul's first readers might have experienced his writings. Another example, Brad Bittner's essay called The Inviolate Temenos of Artemis discusses the relevance of an inscription for understanding Paul's phrase, the wall of division, in Ephesians 2:14. This wall has traditionally been understood as a reference to the balustrade of Herod's temple at Jerusalem, which was intended to maintain separation between Jews and Gentiles on the Temple Mount. Recent scholars have claimed that Paul had in mind the wall enclosing the altar in the temple of Artemis rather than the temple in Jerusalem, which would certainly be of more direct relevance to Ephesian hearers than would a reference to Herod's very distant temple. However, on the basis of epigraphic and archaeological evidence, Bittner steers away from the possible reference to the Artemis temple, and in this case, New Docs lends support to a traditional reading against a newer one. And finally, I cannot resist noting the final two essays of the volume contributed by Jim Harrison, titled The New Testament and the Serious Side of Toilet Humor, and Finding the Right Spot to Take a Leak, both addressing Ephesian toilet graffiti. Jim reminds readers that latrine graffiti do not always focus on frivolous scatological humor, but can offer evidence related to social relations, popular philosophical debates in antiquity, and advice as to how not to offend the gods by peeing in the wrong places. Quoting Jim, what relevance do these Ephesian inscriptions forbidding people to take a leak in civic places have for the New Testament writings? It's a good question. First, there is no reference in the New Testament to prohibitions against public urination, so there's no explicit intersection between each tradition. But we've already made reference to the intense sensitivity of the Ephesians to the dishonoring of public monuments exemplified by the bans on urination, and the charge brought against Paul in Acts 27 regarding his belittling the greatness of Artemis through his preaching of Christ as Lord. End quote. In this example, we see Jim acknowledging no direct connection between toilet epigraphy and the New Testament, but it does tell us something about cultural and religious attitudes that do connect to the New Testament. And once again, this insight is illustrative of ancient attitudes that we knew about, but now have further specific imagery to underscore them. Just as the papyrus from Oxyrhynchus gives voice to ancient teenage angst, a specific example of it expressed in words is more powerful than some abstract statement such as teenagers in the ancient world were angsty too. Now, my comments so far have been limited to part A of New Docs 11, since I have not seen part B until today. But I will share with you some of the topics from the table of contents. Thematic essays, Ephesian Artemis and her city, some priestesses of Artemis and of Ephesus, the imperial cult at Ephesus, women's life in public and private, Ephesian inscriptions in the Greco-Roman context, and a few others, and then exegetical essays acclaiming Artemis in Ephesus, political theologies in Acts 19, 1 Timothy and the confession inscriptions of Asia Minor, the citizenship decrees of Hellenistic Ephesus evaluating Paul's alternative citizenship in epigraphic and papyrological context. They're just some examples. There are other essays in there as well. But it does sound like a fascinating collection of essays that I am sure to read with profit. Part of the original agenda for the creation of New Docs was to stimulate New Testament scholarship to take into account the historical, philological, religious, political, and cultural insights that may be gleaned from epigraphy and other material artifacts. It's therefore encouraging to note that it is getting harder for New Testament scholars to ignore epigraphy in the discipline of exegesis. Recent publications testify to the increasing awareness of the significance of this pursuit within the New Testament Guild, including textbooks released by major publishers for the use of seminary students. A little like the linguistic revolution that has taken hold within biblical studies, which simmered away on the outskirts of the Guild for decades until it finally took off and became mainstream, or at least I think it's mainstream, maybe I'm being too optimistic. So I believe epigraphical studies will be reinserted, and I mean reinserted, into the mainstream of the New Testament Guild. New Docs has already played a vital role in that trajectory, and I'm confident of its central significance going forward. As for the volumes yet to come, New Docs 12 will be delivered to SBL Press by the end of this year. The other 3 New Docs volumes have had their structure and contents finalised and initial steps being undertaken in securing contributors. If New Docs 11 may be regarded the first fruits of what is to come, I would say that the final pentad of the series will be a rich harvest indeed. I offer my warm congratulations to Jim, Brad, and the other contributors to the volume, and it's with great pleasure that I now declare New Docs 11 officially launched. Let me draw your attention to these 2 documents that you can get at the registration desk. They've got QR codes so that you can order Volume A and Volume B. You need this one because the secret discount code is there. So take both and get a hold of New Docs 11.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Con, for those extraordinarily kind words. And thank you, Elena, for this opportunity. Needless to say, it's an extraordinary privilege to be continuing the New Doc series and bringing it to an end, actually, in volumes 11 to 17. There'll be no volume 18. We are bringing the series to an end. And to stand in the shoes of people like Greg Horsley and Stephen Llewellyn is exceptionally intimidating, because I'm nowhere near the greatness of them. But nonetheless, there are special thanks to be given. And the first one is to Professor Judge. He had to be persuaded that it was a good idea to divest the focus of contributors and co-editors and all that from Macquarie to a much wider audience. He had to be convinced that it was a good idea to focus on specific collections. We couldn't do new inscriptions or papyri anymore because we didn't have the money to pay a person to do that for 3 years. That was changed. So to focus on collections was the way to go, and therefore to focus on cities, obviously. The idea of 2 books as opposed to 1. And then the whole internationalisation of the series in terms of contributors and also editors. They were massive changes, and it was just great to see Edwin being able to be persuaded and to be behind it 100%. I'm accountable to the New Docs Committee, and I've never worked with such an encouraging committee. They are relentlessly behind what we're doing and relentless encouragers of me. I put on record my gratitude to Brad Bittner for this volume. Not only were the essays that he wrote extraordinarily insightful and skillful in a whole variety of areas, but his editorial eye was remarkable. I also put on account my indebtedness to Oliver Hastings, who was paid to do the indexes. And I have to report, it's not a new experience. I've experienced this 8 times with another series that I edit, but how wonderful it is to work with SBL. They are extraordinary publishers, so much so that in 2 weeks in another series, I'll be doing the index for that on a book on Galatia, and 2 weeks later it will appear. They are that quick in turning things around, and they are wonderful to work with and extraordinarily helpful. As Connor's explained, the series is proceeding apace, and there's only now Rome, Ostia, Puteoli, and a little bit of Pompeii to finalise. That will be a difficult volume for various reasons. And then that's with Mark Reisner from America. And then the final volume, volume number 17, will be on Corinth, Ostia and Izmir, again with Brad Bittner. In the future, somewhere, I'm sure, in a SEC newsletter, you'll see a request for funding. We don't get payment from SBL royalties. We have a limited amount of money to pay for indexing being done. I cannot do it, obviously, not when there's multiple volumes going on at once, and we will ask for some funding. It's not extraordinarily expensive, but we will eventually run out of money, and we will need some help. The aim of the series in the end is to help students and exegetes of the New Testament to be able to understand the background of the epistles to which that emanate from cities or are being sent to cities. So hence the emphasis on texts in one volume with an epigraphic introduction of the city/cities, and hence the thematic and exegetical essays in the other book. And that's all well and good. And we want to help people that way. and people do need help. To give one example, out of 18 commentaries on Ephesians, how many commentaries actually deal with the Ephesian inscriptions, of which there are more than 3,750? How many commentaries out of that 18 that I looked at deal with the inscriptions? Two of them mention about 3 or 4 of them, and one by S.M. Bow deals greatly with them. But every other commentary shows no interest in the inscriptions. And this is remarkable because one of the great commentaries written is by Harold Honer, and it's full, cover to cover, with incredible knowledge of the ancient world background. And he cites all kinds of evidence, but not one Ephesian inscriptions on his commentary to Ephesians. And I can tell this story now because Harold is with the Lord. And my friend at DTS, Dallas Theological Seminary, asked him, he's a faculty member there, why didn't you discuss the inscriptions? And he said, I didn't know there were any inscriptions. You see, people aren't trained in our theological colleges. They're not aware of them in our universities. They don't know what to do with them because more often than not, there's no English translation. And we are just hopeful that this set of 6 volumes to go and the one already published will make a difference. And while it's great to have people reading what you've written and all that kind of stuff, in the end, what I'm hoping is they won't be reading them. What I want them to do is to go to the inscriptions themselves, forget what Harrison has said or anyone else, and look at the inscriptions themselves, look at the terminology, and then start to wonder how it intersects with the New Testament. If you start to do that yourselves, it is life-changing. It's useful to have all the other stuff, but that's what I'm hoping will occur. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the honour of this. And thank you for Con launching this. And you've heard about the discounts. 30% off.
Just before you all go off to your well-deserved lunch, I can see people sort of casting covert glances at the lunch.
I'm going to interrupt, Anna. So if you did want to make a donation to either the good cause of New Docs or SEC, there are forms up on the table. So please take a form and fill it in and give it to us, either David or myself. And we'd love to see the form filled in.
Thank you, Lynn. That was a very well put. No one could have said that better and more enticingly. So thank you very much. Now, just before you go to lunch, just a couple of things. Just a couple of miscellaneous announcements. I'm very glad to announce that the Australian University of Theology, whose Vice Chancellor is present with us today, has kindly offered some free copies of the back numbers, which are on a table over there. Louise Goswell is supervising this, and I think Lynn arranged it for it to happen. So please, will you take some freebies from the old series? I'd also like to say that we have some very special people here today. We have Mark and Tiu Tamo, who I think are the only original members of SEC, apart from myself, who are still with us in the sense of being present at this, and they've been to everything except the years they've been overseas. Now, also, I'd like to mention Paul Oslington, who I think first came to us when he was about 16. I can remember him looking much the same, actually, in a seminar. And he has pointed out that some of the lectures run by the Ramsay Foundation, which focus on Western civilization, but many of which do have a reference to Christianity, would be well worth your attention. So although they're not SEC events, do watch out for them, and you can certainly Google them. And lastly, I have some prizes to award. Now, as you know, we we used to give prize to the person who'd come the furthest. It led to a lot of arguments and Google Maps being exchanged. And the question, do you include the speakers or do you not include the speakers? So we ditched that. And instead of that, something which is much easier to work out. And Karen and Leslie kindly worked it out for us. I know all the helpers will be thanked later on by Don. But we have two very stalwart people who I hope will accept these offerings. First of all, Rosemary Canavan, who you're very familiar with, who's a marvellous iconographer and who was actually the first to enrol, but you didn't beat the second by very much. So would you like to accept your prize? Thank you. And also to my fellow parishioner, Keith Carpenter, who, since he started coming, has been a very loyal attender at these seminars. So, Keith, you were the second by a whisker, so please will you accept the, the very prestigious second prize. So now it's lunchtime, and look forward to catching up with you all in just under an hour.